Recently, DBS Bank, which is the largest bank in Southeast Asia, valued Ripple at $11.3 billion and projected Ripple IPO could possibly take place by 2028, and they weren't the only ones either. But before we get into the details, it's important to first understand the difference between Ripple, the company managing XRP, and XRP itself. The cryptocurrency asset, JP Morgan analysts recently put out a report saying that they believe Ripple could be worth $8 billion. If you're an XRP holder, you don't own a piece of Ripple. You own XRP, and if you own shares of Ripple, then you're really just an equity holder of the company, and you have nothing to do with the XRP token. However, XRP actually came out before this. XRP actually launched in 2012 as an open-source project. When Ripple goes public, it's more likely that banks feel comfortable using their own banking rails to interact with Ripple, and subsequently, XRP, which might be more appealing to some owners of private companies. Overall, Ripple going public would be a monumental event for the entire crypto space, and could lead to even more mainstream adoption. XRP holders would still be XRP holders, and vice versa. From a technical standpoint, Ripple is a company founded to provide backing to In fact, Ripple Labs and the founders only hold around 20% of all XRP in existence. Nearly 50% of all XRP is currently held in a public escrow account managed by Ripple. Now, these recent reports have caused quite the stir within the XRP community, because a lot of people have been waiting for this news for quite some time. If anything, it could help XRP become more decentralized. Ripple, the company was founded in 2012 by Chris Larsen and Jed McCaleb. The company would receive money from the sale of shares of stock, and then they can use that money to fund operations, expand, hire more employees, etc. However, it's important to understand the differences between the two, especially when discussing the benefits or drawbacks of each. But this isn't something that Ripple necessarily needs to do anytime soon. They're very well capitalized and could probably go years without needing outside investment. And right now, that's exactly the case. And this is important to understand because while most people associate Ripple with the token XRP, those two things are not connected. XRP existed before Ripple as a company. With that being said, the reason why Ripple decided to go public would be to raise capital. Bitcoin, for example, is more centralized than most people realize. In fact, just a handful of major institutional holders control the majority of the Bitcoin supply. This includes entities like BlackRock, MicroStrategy, Grayscale, and even Tesla. Therefore, it's likely that Ripple will only go public when it makes strategic sense to do so, meaning there's probably more upside to be had from being a public company than a private one. For example, being listed on an exchange, like the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ, would increase visibility, credibility, and trust from institutional investors who might not invest otherwise. That being said, another big benefit for XRP holders would be the increased legitimacy and trust from banks and financial institutions. And finally, Ripple going public could also make it easier for them to acquire other companies, since they can now offer stock instead of just cash. However, it's important to remember that the majority of XRP is controlled by Ripple Labs. But even if Ripple did go public, this wouldn't necessarily mean that XRP would automatically go public as well. I know a lot of people are excited about the prospect of Ripple and XRP going public. You see, the true decentralization of XRP can only be achieved if there is no single entity that controls the majority of the tokens. That being said, institutional investment through vehicles like ETF could dilute Ripple Labs' voting power and increase decentralization by spreading ownership among players like Fidelity, etc. In fact, no cryptocurrency today is truly decentralized. So overall, Ripple going public is exciting for a lot of reasons. But it doesn't mean XRP is going public as well. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video.